Hey guys, Chase with Wesley Fabrication. Today we're going to be going over installing the billet rear sets on a 2025 Grom. The installation process is very similar, if not exactly the same for all the years. So before I get started, I kind of lay everything out on the table just to kind of get an idea of what all I'm working with. I recommend you do the same. To get started, we're going to be taking we're going to start with the left side. Our first half of the billet rear set and our second half, we're going to be laying them on top of each other how they go. And then you'll have a bunch of shorter length Allen bolts. You're going to take 3 of those and pop them in these holes here. That's going to secure this half to the front half. We'll tighten these up later, snug them up to whatever you feel comfortable with. And I do recommend, I'm not doing it for this video because I'm going to take all this right back off, but I recommend some blue Loctite on basically everything you can put Loctite on, and it just helps you not have issues down the road. It literally takes, people tend to overuse it. It literally takes, like, that's too much. What I put on there is too much. Very little Loctite's all you need. But let's continue on here. All right, so we've got our 3 bolts in, snugged them up. Like I said, tighten them to whatever you prefer. Next up, you got 1 more of these shorter length bolts. You're gonna drop it down into this center hole here. This is literally just a placeholder. We will use this bolt on the other side for something functional. But drop your bolt in, put your washer on, and then you're gonna go ahead and throw your lock nut on the back of that. We'll tighten that up as well. All right, so now we've got 3 bolts in. Those thread into the actual rear set itself, so no washer, no nut. We've got our 4th bolt in with a washer and a lock nut on the back side. And let's move on to the other side, kind of get the same thing going. So for the left side, same process, except we're going to use a little bit different hardware over here. So for this side, you're going to have 2 very long Allen heads. These are going to go in the upper 2 locations, 1 and 2. I don't recommend tightening any of the 3 until you get them all started like you would assembling anything else. The 3rd one, the bottom one, is going to be a short one, just like the 3 that were used on the other side. We can go ahead and snug these up now. Like I said, tighten them up to whatever you feel comfortable with. And then for the back side of these, you're going to have 2 master cylinder spacers. We'll go ahead and drop these on here now just to put them in the correct spot, as well as 2 washers and 2 lock nuts. And then moving on this side, we're going to take this brake switch bracket, 2 holes mount up to, there's 3 holes here, they mount up to the rearward 2 holes. And you're going to have 2 very short Allen heads. Again, I recommend Loctite on everything. For this video, we're not doing it. Drop your 2 Allens into those 2 holes. We'll snug those up. You're going to have another Allen that is the same length as the 3 that you put in the original left side that we started with. You're going to take it You're just gonna drop it into the most forward hole of the three here, the only one remaining. Just bottom it out, snug it up. And then from there, we should be able to, well, we got one more thing to do here. We gotta take our last remaining Allen, drop it into this hole. Let me grab a different one. This one's a little messed up. Drop it into our hole here. And then we have the brake lever shaft here with the threads on the internal, on the ID of it, and it's gonna thread right onto this portion. And it typically will hold itself from spinning. So like that, I can tighten that up and that's not spinning. If it does happen to spin, throw a couple or a pair of pliers on that, hold it, tighten it up to whatever you feel comfortable with. All right, so we need to go ahead and throw this front peg on just to make our lives a little easier when we go to install it. So you're gonna have a bunch of gold washers, 3/8 washers, 3/8 bolts. We're gonna go ahead and throw a washer on here. The longer pegs go up front, the shorter pegs go on the rear. So we're gonna drop this bolt and washer down in there. Get it through the hole maybe. All right, so we got that through there. Go ahead and drop this through the front hole. And then the nut for this side is actually the shaft for the brake lever. So we'll take it and we'll thread it on the back side here. Like I said, Loctite is super important for this. We're not using it for our install video, but you should when you go to do yours. And then whenever you install that, the set screws in these pegs, they need to be as close to straight down towards the ground as possible. So get that adjusted pretty close right now. And then we'll move over to the bike and continue on. All right, so we're here at the bike. To get started, I've got a 14mm socket on this ratchet, a 19mm on this ratchet. We're gonna be removing the upper nut here on the rear sets. 19 will go on the right side of the bike, 14's on the left. We'll break this loose. So we got the nut removed, put it in a tray just to try to keep everything organized. Next up, we're gonna be driving this axle, or not axle, but this bolt out of the rear sets and the swing arm. To do this, if you're fortunate enough to have another bolt, it works great because it's the right size. I'm not, so I'm using, I think this could be 3/8, it could be 7/16, and this needs to be slightly smaller than this if you don't have a spare axle laying around. But we'll put this here in the center, start tapping it out. It should come out fairly easy, so you shouldn't have to beat on it real hard. It should come right out. All right, we've got that out, all the way out. We're gonna leave this in to help us locate or keep everything located when we go to put that back in later on. So moving on, I'm gonna grab a 12mm socket for that lower bolt. We'll pop out this lower bolt. Like I said, 12mm socket. Take this all the way out. Throw it in our tray. And then I'm gonna need to pop the bolt out of the exhaust here. That is a 12mm socket and a 12mm wrench. You could do this before you take any of that out. It'll be a little bit more solid, but it's not a big deal however you want to do it. Pop this out. Set the exhaust down on something that won't scratch it all up. If you have aftermarket exhaust, it won't pivot like that, but OEM does. And then what we'll do from there is we got to pop out this brake switch bracket, or the brake switch here. because it'll hit this plastic as we try to pull this out, so it'll be in our way. So I'm gonna grab a pair of needle nose. We're gonna pop out the spring, not the large spring, but the smaller spring that's attached to this brake switch. We're gonna pop it out of this bracket, and then we'll pop this out. So I went ahead and used a hammer and tapped this through, so that way we didn't have a mile sticking out, but just get a little stub sticking out so you can get this pulled off. But I went ahead and got my needle nose. What I'll do is I'll grab that spring there and I'll twist it up. I'll twist it like that, and it'll just pop right out of there, out of your way. So from there, we can just grab this and pop it out and pull that up and out, and we can lay it anywhere for now out of our way. I'll just tuck it in here so it's out of our way. From there, we should be able to slide this off and flip it up, or we'll go this direction. And then we're gonna need to grab a 10 or 8mm socket. I'm gonna throw this back on here so I can grab that. All right, so we got our 8mm socket on here. And slide this back off. Come over here to this side. So on the back side of the rear set, it's got 2 bolts holding the master cylinder onto the rear set. So we'll go ahead and pop these out. We're not gonna reuse these, but it would still be a smart idea to save them. All right, now we've got our snap ring pliers. If you don't have snap ring pliers, you can get away with using a small flat blade, anything that you can get this snap ring off of the brake lever. So we'll go ahead and pop our snap ring pliers in here. Just wanna be careful that you don't open these up too far, because we are gonna reuse these. Just enough to get it off there. Throw that in our tray. We'll have this washer. Throw it in our tray. And then you should be able to just slide this lever right off of here, just like that. I'll set this up here out of the way for now. Maybe. And that's our right side rear sets off. I'm gonna set this down here. And there is a little spacer that's behind the rear sets. You're gonna wanna reuse these. I'm gonna pull it off for now so I don't lose it. These will go back on. Now we're on the left side of the bike. If I had a shorter rod, it would make this a lot easier, but I don't. So I'm gonna drive this back through the other way so we can get this off in a minute. All right, so drive that back through to a manageable length. And then we're gonna go ahead and take our 12mm socket and pop out the bottom bolt on this side. So we've got that one off. It's not gonna come off at the moment because our shifter is still attached to the output shaft of the motor. So what you're gonna need to do is grab a 10mm socket and take it out. And like I said, it's right here on the output shaft of the motor. There's a bolt, you'll see it. We'll loosen it up. And actually, I believe we need to take it all the way out, or else it's gonna hold us up. All right, so we've got that bolt out. Now we can actually take that and slide it off the output shaft at the same time as the rear set, pull it all out as one. Then we're gonna need our snap ring pliers again. There's a snap ring on the back side of the shifter here. Again, we're gonna reuse it, so try not to damage it or open it up too far. Just enough to get it off, that's all you need. And then we got a washer on the back side of this, the lever, and then another washer. We're gonna reuse all these washers, so to go ahead and pull them all off now, put them in your tray. And then from there, we can start getting our billet rear sets installed. So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten, and once I have this set screw at the bottom located as straight down as possible, I'm gonna go ahead and tighten up this peg. I am working on a revised version of this that has 2 flat spots for a wrench. This that I have here today does not. So I'm gonna clamp that on there with some vice grips. That'll allow us to go ahead and tighten up our peg. All right, so after you get this all tightened up, or your bolt for your peg all tightened up and everything's secure, we're gonna go ahead and take the original bolt for this upper portion here, drop it through. Now we need to take the space, there's two spacers that have this larger hole in the center that fit over this. You're gonna want the shorter one of the two for this side. Go ahead and slide it on, and then you'll have the spacer that came off right here. It's gonna go on that side of the spacer that I supply. Then from there, we'll go ahead and throw this in this hole. I still have that shaft running through all this to locate it. I just hammered it back a little bit so I could get this started. So now I'm gonna take my hammer, tap this through. You wanna go real gentle. If you feel it hang up like that, something's not lined up quite right. So I'm gonna let this hang here for now. Now I'm gonna lift up on this bolt. Most of the time they need to go up and forward. So kind of grab here and manipulate it until you get it to go through. Like I said, if you try forcing this through, you're gonna mess up the threads on into that bolt. And if you don't have a tap and die set, you'll have a whole nother problem. So you can kind of look in here and tell, like, okay, it needs to go up, forward, back, whatnot. I'm gonna go ahead and throw this bottom bolt in to keep this out of my way for this process. So for the bottom bolt, it's the factory bolt. There's 3 of these typically included in your kit. They're all identical. Pick one, and you'll take your bolt, put it through that bottom hole in the rear set. Take your spacer, put it on the back side of that. Go ahead and slide this on up and get it started in our hole. The reason I'm doing this is to hold this rear set out of my way so I'm not hitting it with a hammer. So I got that bolt started just to hold this so I could hit on this with the hammer and not have it in the way the whole time. So like I said, this has to be manipulated one way or the other to get this to go through. All right, so in my case, I just had to pull it straight towards the front of the bike, and then it went ahead and went through. Go ahead and gently tap this on through as far as you can. It's gonna hang up on the other side, so don't get carried away just hitting it. Just take your time. Right there we got hung up, so I'm gonna leave it there for now. And then we're gonna pop this back out of the bottom. That allows me to slide this back out. It's easier to do this way if you only have one set of hands. So from there, we're gonna need to reinstall our shifter onto that shaft that I supply. So to do that, we're gonna take one of our black washers that originally came off. We're gonna slide it onto our shaft. Then we're gonna take our lever. It gets kind of confusing on how this is oriented, but this is how it goes on there. We're gonna slide it onto that. It would be smart to throw some grease on this. Mine already had grease on it from the factory, so it's still kind of lubed up, so we're gonna leave it as is. We're gonna take our second black washer, cap it on the back, and then from there we need to throw our snap ring back on. All right, so I've got my snap ring on my pliers. Putting them on is typically easier than taking them off. It's kind of hard to get that on video, but I've got it snapped in place. I'm making sure that it's on there and secure. And then from there, we can go ahead and slide this back up, and we'll just get a couple threads started on this lower bolt again, just to hold it up there out of our way. All right, so now that I've got a few threads started back on that lower bolt to hold this rear set, from falling back here towards us. On this output shaft on the transmission, we're not going to be able to get it on video because it's so small, but there is a little center punch up towards the top of this lever, or up towards the top of that output shaft. The slot that's in the lever needs to line up directly on that center punch point for this to be located in the correct position. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Just like that. Now we're going to want to take our original bolt that we took out to start and throw it back through the hole. You may have to slide your lever in or out a little bit to get this bolt to go through. There's a groove on that shaft that it has to line up with. And we'll throw our 10mm socket back on here. And we'll get this bolt tightened up. If you're using an aftermarket shifter, you won't need to do any of this, and you can even just use a nut. I'll go ahead and throw a washer and nut in the kit for this peg. If you go that route, you'll just put a washer and a nut on the back side. You know, you can skip all of this stuff, but if you want to reuse the original shifter, we'll have to do these steps and get that snugged up. From there, we can go ahead and get our lower rear set bolt tightened up, or at least snugged up. I probably wouldn't fully tighten it yet, but all right, so I've got that ran up. I'm gonna back it off just a little bit. It leaves us a little bit of wiggle room for this bolt to be manipulated around to go through the other side. So that'll be our next steps, getting this drove all the way back through the other side. And it's just as tricky as this first side to get lined up. It's not a great process. Go ahead and hop up. So what I typically find to work best, again, they typically need to go, the swing arm itself needs to go forward and up in most cases. So if you're doing this by yourself and you have this bolt sticking through or whatever you're using to locate it, you can pick up on this and forward and try tapping it through. What I found works pretty good is if you actually take your foot and push on this tire, you push this over like that and pull the bike towards you, and that'll manipulate the swing arm to where you need it to be to get that bolt started. So that's what I'm gonna do here. And then, so I've got the swing arm manipulated forward, but it looks like it still needs to go up a little bit. So I'm gonna grab here on the bottom of this and pull up. I'm gonna have another look. It's actually too far forward now. I'm gonna bump it back a little bit. We're a little bit further than we were. Feels like we're still hanging up. Like I said, you don't wanna force this through because you'll mess up those threads. You'll carefully tap that through as far as you can without marring up the powder on the left side rear set here. So all I did there was I kept manipulating the swing arm with my foot, my hand, everything to get everything lined up as well as I could. So again, do not force that through or else you'll be gonna have a whole nother problem. But we've got it driven through. Let's get some tools organized to come over to the right side of the bike and continue on. All right, so for the right side of the bike, you're gonna have the only spacer that has the largest hole left. It's pretty long. It's the only one like it in this kit. So we're gonna wanna throw on our washer that was originally behind all this here first. We're gonna wanna throw on the spacer that I provide. And then from there, we'll take the rear set and we're gonna go ahead and pop off these nuts that we put on here at the beginning of the video. and pop off the washer. We're gonna leave the spacers on. They need to stay on for now. This part's kind of tricky. You just have to manipulate it until you get it how you need. So, get your brake lever oriented the correct direction. We'll go ahead and you got to try to slide the master cylinder and the brake lever on here all at one time, or else stuff starts binding up. So I'm going to get the master cylinder onto the two studs just enough to hold it. And then we're going to bring our lever around. If I do it this way, you guys can see a little better probably. All right, so I can get my master cylinder slid on there just enough to hold it in place. And then we'll get our brake lever. There's a lot of moving parts here, so it is kind of a pain to get everything lined up just right. My master cylinder is still on there a little bit too far. So we're gonna slide it off a little bit more. And then, all right, now we got her started. So now that our brake lever is started on there, we can slide this all down these studs at the same time, like so. And then we'll take our washers, throw those back on here, our lock nuts, and then we'll get our 10mm socket on our ratchet. If you have to, you can throw your Allen wrench back in the other side to keep your bolts from moving, but as long as you tighten them up properly, they should be okay. So after we get the master cylinder nuts tightened up, we need to get our original washer. There goes our spring. We need to get our original washer put back on here, and then we need to get our snap ring installed on there as well. Extra set of hands is nice. I'm trying to demonstrate this as if you're on your own because it's possible, but it does make it a little bit tougher. All right, so we've got our washer and our snap ring back on there. Now we can start getting this put onto the bike. So we'll slide this onto that stud that we drove through earlier. I'm gonna go ahead and throw this spring on. It fell off a moment ago. You wanna put the longer side of the spring through, or on the brake lever side. So we'll pop that through. Then we'll throw this back on here. All right. Make sure you have your original spacer up against the swing arm, the one that I provide there, and then put your rear set on. From there, we'll throw the spacer. Like I said earlier, there's 3 of these in your kit. Grab the second one of the 3. You'll throw it behind the rear set here. Poke your bolt through. Then we'll line it up where it needs to go on the frame and get it started. Just run it in there a little ways. Back it off a couple turns. Now we'll fish our brake sensor, our brake switch back out of here. I had it all tucked up here out of my way a moment ago, so I've got to fish it back out. All right. If this happens to come out like mine did, the shorter portion goes through the sensor, then the longer portion is what drops down to your brake lever down there. We'll throw it through the hole, pop it down into its home. I would probably go ahead and throw this nut on just to be safe. Make sure this thing doesn't come off. And then we'll take our needle nose. Oh, I put this spring on the wrong way. Let's pop this back out real quick. Can learn from my mistake here. The spring has to, it's hard to explain, but instead of hooking it the way I did here like that, hook it from this side. It'll make it easier to hook up at the bottom. We'll go ahead and drop this back through. Now we can hook it up down here. We got it popped back into its home. Our return spring is still here out of the motor. If it's dropped down between the motor and the rear set, you're going to want to pull it out. Keep it out here as much or as best you can, or else it'll screw you up when you go to tighten everything down. So now we've got everything put on here. We've got our brake switch spring hooked back up. The next step that we're going to do is reinstall the return spring. And this is a tough part. I don't have like a spring puller, I think they're called. It's like basically a handle with a hook. You can hook here and pull it up there. I'm going to use these channel locks. You just have to be careful because you don't want it to slip and scratch up your plastic up here or scratch up the rear set. So it's kind of a tough deal. It's one of the toughest parts of this, probably because I don't have the right tool for it, but we're gonna make do. I'm gonna try to grab it from the top instead, maybe. I've got it almost on there. I'm just gonna take a wrench, use it as a punch to pop it on there. Maybe not a wrench. Probably squeeze it with a pair of pliers and get it to pop all the way onto that bolt. Yep. All right, now we've got the return spring popped all the way onto that bolt. We're set there. So we'll go ahead and tighten everything down. There is torque values for this stuff. I always just snug them up and I don't ever have any issues. So that's what we're gonna do on this again. You're gonna need your 14 millimeter for the left side of the bike, your 19 millimeter for the right side, and then get this tightened back up. So we've got that tight. We'll swap back to our 12 mil and go ahead and tighten up these bottom ones. I'll tighten up the left side real quick. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and install our pegs here. We've got our 3/8 bolt, 3/8 washer. I'm gonna put those together, drop it down in the peg, like that. Again, the set screw, face it straight towards the ground if you can. We'll pop it through the hole. We'll grab another washer, our lock nut. We'll sneak around the back side and get those installed. Front row. You can do this before you put them on the bike if you want to. It's just hard to tighten everything up when it's off the bike, so that's why I waited in this scenario. But you could always get them started before you tighten everything up. Probably the better move. I didn't do it here, but I'm gonna use the extension with a socket on it to help me turn that because it's hard to get to just with your fingers. All right, we finally got her started. I'm gonna grab the wrench for the back side. These are all 9/16, so I got a 9/16 socket, 9/16 wrench. My set screw moved a little bit, so I'm going to rotate it back down where it goes and continue to tighten it up. All right, so we've got that tightened up. We'll go ahead and do the rear one. So if you're running a OG Grom or an SF Grom, the exhaust is going to mount up here in this portion that's machined out. You're going to want to take that third and final spacer, the three that were the same, you can put it here, use your exhaust bolt, tighten it all up. For 22 and up, since the exhaust mounts back here, you're going to have this bracket that I supply for the exhaust. So what we're going to do is take our peg and our bolt, just like all the other ones, drop it down through the hole, and you're going to want to take your exhaust bracket. There's one side that's slotted, one side that's round for the bolt to go through. You're going to want to have it positioned just like this. There's a machined portion on the back of this rear set that this drops into and holds it in place. So you get it on there, go ahead and pop everything through. We'll grab our final washer for this side, final nut, and we'll throw it on the back. And then we'll take our wrenches and go ahead and tighten this up. Try to keep that set screw positioned at the bottom like I mentioned. I'm going to leave it slightly loose for now. It's pretty snugged up, but I'm going to leave it just loose enough where I can manipulate this exhaust bracket up or down when we go to install this exhaust. So we're going to do that next. So depending on what exhaust setup you're running, you're probably not going to be able to get this set screw put in with the exhaust mounted up. So for this application, I went ahead and tightened this bolt for the peg, secured everything nice and tight. Then I'm going to go ahead and pop this slider in. These sliders have dimples drilled in them for those set screws to catch. So you want to align that dimple with those threads at the bottom. And we'll take our Allen wrench, start it by hand. I don't have much room to work with this exhaust hanging down right here. You know what? We're just gonna get that out of our way for now. All right. Now we'll throw this Allen in the bottom of here. Snug this up. Again, Loctite for these set screws, especially these set screws, because they're gonna, if you don't, they'll vibrate out and you'll lose your slider down the road somewhere. So we've got that all tightened up and secure. We'll grab our exhaust, slip it back onto the header, slide it all the way in as far as it'll go. Now this flange, it does mount on the back side of this exhaust bracket that I supply, not on the front. So you'll put that up there just like so. Take the supplied hardware, bolt, washer. You can use the original, but it is pretty long. So I just supply this one because it looks a little bit cleaner when it's all bolted up. Washer on the back, nut on the back, 12mm wrench. I'm using the original nut off the original bolt. I'll probably supply one in the kit, so it may not be a 12, but anyway, go ahead and tighten this up. Now we got our exhaust all mounted up. Rear sets are tight. We just got to throw on the passenger peg on the left side, put on all our sliders. We'll go ahead and do that and we'll be right back with you. It's the same process as this. Slide her in, make sure you have the bolts tight and everything, of course, first. Slide her in, set screws in the bottom, and our install is going to be pretty well finalized. So we'll show you what it looks like all buttoned up. All right, so we've got everything installed. We've got our pegs tight, our sliders tight, everything's Loctited. It'd be a good idea to go through and just double check all your work, make sure all your nuts and bolts are tight. Once you've got all that done, the last thing you need to do is verify that your brake switch is in the correct position. So what you do is go ahead and turn on your key. Your brake light's going to come on, or your tail light, and if you push this down, you see nothing's happening right now. The brake light is actually engaged as it sits. So we're going to need to adjust this switch. So what you do to do that, there's a little plastic nut on top of the switch. You're going to turn that one way or the other until that brake light goes off. So right there, the brake light went off. Go ahead and get that. So you'll see if I turn this just a little bit further, my brake light's on. So I'll back it off some more, and you'll have to play with this and get it exactly where you want it. And then whenever you depress the brake lever, your tail light will come on. You don't want to have to push it very far, because if you're coasting to a stop and you're just barely riding the brakes, you want to make sure your brake light's on so cars behind you can slow down accordingly. But I'll leave it there for now. It looks like I'm going to back it off a little bit more. I'll cycle it a few times, make sure it goes off each time. So once you get it just where you want it, you're all finished up on the install. So we'll do a little walk around, show you guys what it looks like, and yeah, that's gonna do it. One other thing to mention, if you get these on and the brake lever isn't quite where you like it, all my stuff's in the factory locations, so it should be just like it was factory. If it's not, there's a nut on the bottom side of that master cylinder. You can actually adjust it, and it'll pull this brake lever up or down depending on just how you want it. There'll be a jam nut. Pop the jam nut loose, adjust that lever, or adjust that master cylinder, get it where you want it, retighten those jam nuts, and that'll get your lever to where you like it. Like I said, it should be in the same spot as factory. If you do want to move it, that's how you do it.